I'm Stephen Garvey, founder, leader of National Citizens Alliance of Canada, NCA. Thank you for joining me tonight. This presentation is on what's called Third World Immigrant Populism and how it is impacting Canadians, the country, our future. So by the end of this presentation, you will be fully up to speed on third world immigrant populism, whether you agree with it or not. But in the NCA's opinion, this is a reality, we would argue, a dark reality of Canada now. And we believe it will get only worse if we do not address it. NCA is addressing it. Before I get into our presentation tonight, I want to make it very clear that the NCA supports a limited number of immigrants into the country. NCA supports 50,000 or less per year in total. We will bring the best people into our country who will integrate, contribute to the country, be a positive force in the country. We would direct outright mass immigration. We have no issue with foreign cultures in Canada that are compatible with our civil rights and liberties. However, we at NCA take issue when tax dollars are being spent to promote and enhance foreign cultures in Canada. NCA will put an end to that nonsense, which was brought about by the Conservatives in 1988 through the Multiculturalism Act. We will amend that act so the only tax dollars that are being used in regard to culture and heritage are towards traditional cultures and heritage, as it should be. In addition, NCA supports mandatory integration into the basic cultural norms of Canada. And I'm referring to an emphasis on economic integration, social integration, basic cultural integration to the habits of what it means to be Canadian. And this is the most important thing. Being first and foremost a Canadian. Period. It's not about being half Indian, half Canadian. Half Punjabi, half Canadian. Half Arab, half Canadian. 3/4 Mexican, 1/4 Canadian. No. We're looking for integration in being a Canadian. Period. And this is all premised on the founders, the pioneers, the settlers who created Canada, the traditional Canadians, Francophones, Anglophones, European Canadians, First Nations. We are the majority. That is reality. That is NCA. If you support that, support NCA. Third world immigrant populism. The reason I'm using third world there is because 4 out of 5 immigrants to this country, 4 out of 5 migrants to this country are from the third world. They are predominantly third world migrants. And it doesn't matter which mainstream party. They're all doing the same thing. What immigrant populism means is very simple. It's about putting migrants first in terms of access to healthcare, social programs, job hiring, human rights, cultural rights, religious rights, you name it. That's what this third world immigrant populism is about. It's perpetuated by the federal government, other governments, the media, academia, educational institutions, the mainstream parties, without question. They're all in on it, without question. Also, the establishment, related to this, they push diversity. They make false claims about immigration. All of these mainstream parties, do your research. They all say immigration is good for the economy. All like parrots saying that, and we say no at NCA. And we will provide the studies on next Tuesday when we do our presentation on part 3, economic, of our immigration plan for Canada. But we say no. Immigration is neutral to the economy. It can be negative to the economy as a whole. They also make false claims that immigration deals with an aging population. And NCA says no. The research says that is false, but they perpetuate it. The establishment encourages migrants in the country to go into enclaves. They say nothing about the expanding enclaves in Canada. Brampton, other parts of Toronto, Mississauga, Halifax, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Regina, Winnipeg, you name it. They say nothing about it. It is ongoing. They encourage migrants to push their cultural homeland culture, their religious norms. They tell them in our institution, educational institutions, on the mainstream media, that traditional Canadians are bad people due to our treatment of First Nations, that we stole their land. This is what they tell them. And then they go further and say Canada has no cultural identity, no heritage, no distinct values. You are free to do what you want, live how you want. This is immigrant populism, third world immigrant populism to the core. It encourages a feeling of entitlement by new migrants to justify their drain on our welfare system, social benefits, while the establishment ignores these ethnic supremacy, which is in them, and their ethnic nationalism, which they all have and they promote. Traditional Canadians, patriotism is labeled as racism and white nationalism. NCA gets that all the time. This is because we're resisting this globalist agenda in the form of third world immigrant populism being opposed on our country. What this is, and you'll hear it from NCA first, before these other mainstream parties may copy us. But what this is a form of neo-colonialism. And what neo-colonialism is the use of economic, political, cultural, and other pressures to control or influence other countries, especially former dependencies. But what's happening in Canada's case, it's being imposed from within by a crooked, sold out establishment on its own people. This is all orchestrated. This is all planned and being imposed on its own people, without question. Canada is being neo-colonized as we speak right now. And this is all linked. The neocolonialism is linked to globalist corporate interests. To turn Canada into a UN-like globalist village. And these globalist corporations on the top and in control. They fear traditional Canadians. They want to push them down. They want to divide them. They want to suppress them and overcome them with this third world immigrant populism. Without question, that is what's going on. I'm going to show you evidence of this. And what this is, and I made this statement in part 2 of our immigration plan. This is a major fissure in the country between third world immigrant populism, the globalists on one side, and traditional Canada on the other side. And this fissure is growing wider and wider. You need to ask yourself where you stand. If there was a war, which side would you be on? That's all you need to ask yourself. And these people coming in, there's some great migrants coming in. But there's another darker side of this ethnic nationalism and supremacy that's coming in. And some of these people are brutally ruthless. Brutally ruthless. They have no regard for anyone else. It's all about them. They're here and they're going to take over. This is like barbarians coming in. This is what this crooked federal government and the crooked establishment is letting in our country. And I'm going to show you evidence of this right now. This is from an ethnic enclave in Northeast Calgary we went into. It's 89% visible ethnic minority. We went in there for the sole purpose to document an ethnic enclave. Nothing else. But we were met with severe resistance afterwards. How dare us, as Canadians, to go into this enclave? And I'll show you what's coming. And I'll give you another example after this. These are some of the horrendous remarks we got, and this is all tied into third world immigrant populism. Quote, "Go back to Europe. This is native land. Canada is not belong to you and built by immigrants. I am no way benefiting from the work done by Europeans. Rather, people like me have to help deconstruct all the narratives of white supremacy. Immigrants, European Canadians, are those who arrived on indigenous land, exploited labor and resources, and ethnically cleansed populations. Immigrants work harder for their livelihood than European Canadians. Most of them don't waste their earnings on bars, pubs, and casinos. You are so privileged as a white individual. If immigrants leave Canada, you are asked to work in their places, you will not survive. Why do you feel the need to emphasize that European Canadians are part of Canada's traditional population? Settler colonialist ideologies rest on racist beliefs while perpetuating a belief that Europeans discovered Canada. I'm not going to go on, but you get the gist of these comments. These are people that were welcomed into our country, and look at the utter contempt, disdain they have for traditional Canadians. This is reality on the ground in Canada, whether you want to face it or not. This is the divide in Canada perpetuated by the federal government and the establishment. I'm going to give you one more example today of this. Recently, we did some interviews of Arab Canadians, Arabs. We wanted to see what they think. It was an honest dialogue, and it was similar to Northeast Calgary. We got severe resistance. We got phone calls calling us all kinds of names like this. And the comments on our page were horrendous, very similar. These are some of the comments. Shahab Mansour says, the intent of this video is very clear, showing premeditated racist ideals that you were portrayed in statements and questions such as you came as a refugee. The assumption was formulated by Stephen Garvey off of no prior knowledge, except for the fact that these people came from Yemen to live in Canada, which can be described in any other way but racial profiling. That is absurd. What are you doing in our country? That is absurd, what that guy said. These migrants, of course they came to our country. They weren't born here. The ones that I was talking to. Maybe they were. Maybe their parents immigrated. But what's the issue with asking their history, their background? Why are these people so defensive? This is an example of the enclave, no-go zone mentality that we see has stricken Europe and is already in Canada without question. Then this Shahab goes on, Mansour, he says, Nelson, he's responding to this gentleman, Nelson Bradley. He says, many immigrants from all over the world have respected jobs and have left a positive impact on Canada, offering knowledge and experience that is unrivaled. Using the word assimilate to describe what you believe immigrants should do as they enter Canada sounds extremely similar to the barbaric way of thinking that led to the residential schools all over Canada with the motive of assimilation. Again, they're linking back to the propaganda the government has fed into them that European Canadians are bad people. And there's a resistance to any form of integration into Canada. They think they can come here and do whatever they want, push whatever they want. This is the mentality. Ahmed, he says, Nelson Bradley, just remember that we never tried to force anything on you. If you can give me one example, then I'll be right. Then you'll be right. But I don't think you can. But I can, though. Remember the residential schools. Schools that were created by Christians to force First Nations into your beliefs. This is how they view European Canadians. All the good European Canadians did to this country. All the good. There would be no Canada without European Canadians. Ibrahim Al-Didin, he says, everyone here is an immigrant, even Stephen Garvey himself. And then he goes on about that. Well, I'm sorry to break the news to you. Not everyone here is an immigrant. I was born in Canada. And most Canadians were born in Canada. They're not immigrants. That is a fact. And this country was created by pioneers, settlers, nation builders, not immigrants. That's a fact. But the government, through its third world immigrant populism, is pushing the narrative that we're all immigrants. This is false. They want to kick down any form of Canadian nationalism. Maria here, she responds to Ibrahim al-Din, all it is that infertile people with self-inflicted infertility, since their cultural values are about breaking down their family unit, have to import fertile people to pay their pensions. Infertile people who can't get laid or married are jealous of us fertile Arabs who have no problems getting married and having kids. Infertile people are upset their race is dying out because their cultural values promote infertility, and then are jealous of our values as Arabs and Muslims promote fertility. So we're having kids and they don't. Do you see the attitude? Maria was welcomed into this country, and look at her contempt. Look at her disdain, and look at her false assumptions. Canada has a positive natural birth rate of 294 new births, new Canadians every day. And look at her contempt. She's not identifying as a Canadian. She's an Arab. She's a Muslim. This is troubling. This is reality. You cannot make this up. Ibrahim, responding to Maria, it's not easy to give HP addiction, and they are late, and most Canadians I know are married from overseas and can't stop telling how happy they are. So more contempt, this time directed at Canadian woman. Unbelievable. The disdain, the unappreciation, the contempt for traditional Canadians. These are barbarians coming in, without question. Finally here, Maria says back to Ibrahim, I think it's better that they went back to church and learn how to be attractive people who others want to marry, and then teach that to others so white people have more kids so they stop being so jealous. They are just nervous that whites became endangered species after they left the church and went all progressive and had to import religious people because we have families and are able to form families. Again, more contempt, misinformation. This is unbelievable misinformation. One thing she's not realizing is the reason there isn't larger traditional families is because of the excessive burden of taxation on traditional Canadians. While these migrants coming in are getting a free ride, all kinds of benefits. That's the reality. She doesn't see it. But NCA is going to reverse this because we're going to promote traditional families through tax incentives similar to what they're doing in Hungary. We're the only federal party that has this program. And we will show her the true reasons. And this is another suppression of traditional people, the incredible economic burden on them, treated like second-class, third-class citizens in their own country. I hope this is eye-opening tonight. And I want to be very clear. This is a growing fissure in the country. It's very disturbing, but it is reality. We need to deal with it as soon as possible. The NCA solutions are all through our policies, but I'm going to list a few right now, how we will deal with this. First off, we're going to have a moratorium on immigration with no fixed end date. We're going to reduce immigration to 50,000 or less in total. We're going to promote and enhance traditional Canada, including encourage larger traditional families, similar to what Hungary is doing. And we will implement mandatory integration to get this utter disaster fixed. And it's a growing disaster. Please share your comments tonight. Give us your feedback. And thank you. Please share the message tonight.